In today's video, I'm going to be diagnosing a very common car problem, and it doesn't actually involve any dinosaurs. So this car came to me with a really bad rough idling issue. So the owner said when it was in drive at a stoplight or a stop sign, the whole car would hum and vibrate, kind of shaking. But when he would put it in neutral or park, the vibration would mostly go away. So this is a really common issue. And not only did I figure out what it was, I fixed it as well. So make sure you stick around. Speaking of vibrations, if you're in a good vibes, you're definitely going to want to subscribe to Budget Mechanic because we got a lot of good stuff coming. Now, we've already made an exhaustive video on all the reasons that a car vibrates at idle, and I hope you go check that out. But today, I'm going to be doing a practical application where I'm going to go step by step how I diagnose why this car is vibrating so much when you're sitting at a stoplight. And we're going to start with the easiest things first because I'm smart and also lazy. So the first thing I want to do is plug in my car scanner and check out any clues that I can find in the computer. Now, this car doesn't have a check engine light on the dash, but if it did, that would be even more reason to plug in the scanner and find out what's going on. Now, I am using this scanner by ThinkCar. They sent me one of these, and I've been using it a lot lately and really liking it. It's really full featured, and it is pretty cool that you can plug it in wirelessly, walk around. You don't have to get a fancy one. They make some real basic ones that have all the live data functionality for as little as 20, 30 bucks. And we'll put a couple links in the description you can check out. Now, the first thing and the main thing I like to check with the scanner is the fuel trims. Now, this is basically the car compensating for vacuum leaks. And vacuum leaks are a really common reason for a vibrating engine, especially on a little 4-cylinder like this. Okay, so here I see the long-term fuel trim is at 7%, which is good. It's in between sort of the nominal values of -10 and +10. So that means it's within acceptable range. If I had a number like 15 or -20 outside of that range, it would mean that the computer's really compensating for some problem in the engine, like a massive vacuum leak. And that's where you'd start to see check engine lights on your dash. All right, so the next little test I'm gonna do when it comes to fuel trims is I'm gonna get in here, in park, and I'm gonna rev the engine up to 2,500 RPM, and I'm gonna just see what happens to these levels. Come on, here we go. Okay, so it's up at 2,500 RPM, and I can see that this long-term fuel trim really isn't changing all that much, which leads me to kind of believe that there's not a big vacuum leak. If there was a big vacuum leak, revving this up or mimicking driving down the road would cause this fuel trim to drop significantly, and I'm not seeing a huge drop. All right, another thing I'm gonna check in my scanner is the engine coolant temperature. And the reason I check this is because if something's going wrong with the coolant sensor and the car is not sure what temperature the engine's running at, it can sometimes suddenly run rich or lean because it doesn't know if it's just starting up or if it's fully warmed up, and it can cause the car to run rough. So I'm just going to look at the graph of the engine coolant temperature and see if there's any like sudden fluctuations or goes to zero. So just a note, when you're doing these scanner tests, it is good to do it after the car is warmed up so that you don't run into warm-up cycles or anything out of the ordinary. So I can see here that I'm at 200 degrees and it's holding rock steady, so I don't think there's any confusion for the computer there. Now, while I'm here, I will say that what's cool about this scanner and a lot of scanners that I've used is it shows the battery voltage right up here in the corner at all times. So I can see that it's running at 13.5 volts. So that's a really easy check you can do, because if an alternator was dying, putting out too little of voltage, that could cause your engine to run weird as well and cause some shaking. The next thing I'm gonna look for is misfires. Now, normally if you have misfires, you're gonna have a flashing check engine light on your dash and everything will be running really bad. But sometimes if you just have a few misfires every once in a while, the computer won't actually throw a code. But with my scanner, I can go back and I can look at the history if there's been any small misfire events. So that eliminates misfires as a cause for rough idle. The next thing I want to check with the scanner is the outputs coming from my oxygen sensors. Because if an oxygen sensor is failing, it will confuse the computer into putting, too much air or fuel into the mix, and it can make your engine run rough. So you use my live data again, and I'm going to go in here and select bank 1 sensor 2 and the bank 1 sensor 1 oxygen sensor. One cool thing I forgot to mention before about this specific scanner is that actually once you select a value that you want to monitor, it'll show you the acceptable range that your car is supposed to be at. So I can see here that my bank 1 sensor 1 is within the normal range. 0 to 5, it's at 3, and the bank 2 is also in the normal range at 0.7, between 0.1 and 0.9. So oxygen sensors are looking good, and I don't think that's the reason for rough idle. The next thing I want to check is engine mounts. Now the engine mounts are what actually hold the engine and the transmission in the car. And they're meant to act as kind of a shock absorber to isolate the vibration from the engine to the rest of the car. Now, when the engine mounts break down and stop working, the vibration from the engine goes straight into the rest of the car and you can get that nasty vibration. So most cars have 3 or 4 engine mounts under the hood, and here's one here on the left. And what you're looking for is that big rubber section having any cracks or missing chunks, or if it's super stretched one way or the other, that can be bad. There's another one usually behind and often attaches to the transmission. It's way down at the bottom, but it actually looks pretty good on both sides. And moving along, you have one often underneath your airbox area on the right, and that one looks good as well. And lastly, you'll have one on the front usually. So they all look pretty good physically from the outside, but one more test that you can do that would really reveal if there's any stress or failing rubber would be to have an assistant get in the car and put it in drive with the brake on. And at that moment that it goes into drive, you can see how much the engine shifts. If it kind of drastically moves when it goes into drive, those engine mounts have a little bit too much free play and they're letting the engine move too much. That can point to failing engine mounts, even if they don't look bad. Wow, didn't move at all. So this engine barely moves at all when it goes into drive. So the engine mounts are working great. Now, while I'm here, I'm gonna check the air filter and just make sure it's in good shape. A super dirty air filter could cause the engine to run rough. It would have to be really dirty, but it's very easy to check. So I'm just gonna give it a little look over. Really not that bad. All right, the next thing I'm going to address is the mass airflow sensor. Now, this is a sensor usually found on the airbox or in this main intake. And it basically helps the computer determine how much air is going into the engine so it can make its ratio calculations. But what can happen is this can get dirty or go bad, and then the computer freaks out. It doesn't know how much air and fuel to throw into the engine, and it can make the engine run poorly. So it's a very easy thing. You want to first disconnect the electrical plug, and then it's usually held on by a couple screws or something. Okay, when it comes time to pull the MAF out, you want to be gentle because it's a very fragile element. So even if the mass airflow doesn't look dirty, it's a good idea to clean it, and that's what we're going to do. But also, sometimes they can fail internally, and one way you can test that is by running the car with it unplugged and seeing if everything runs exactly the same. That means the mass airflow sensor was actually probably not even active in the first place. So when you're cleaning the mass airflow sensor, you want to use a dedicated cleaner. If you use brake fluid or something, it could actually damage the sensor in the small parts. I'm just gonna give it a nice little bath here. Okay, so once it's all dried off, I'm gonna put it back in place and get it reattached. All right, after running for a little while, I can say there's no change. Still shaking. The next thing that I want to address is the idle control. Now, on older cars, there was a thing called an idle air control valve that actually controlled the speed of the car's engine at idle. And on the newer ones, such as this one, that function is built into the throttle body, which means the computer is setting at different instances, under different conditions, how fast the engine runs at idle. And what can happen with this throttle body, it's a physical mechanism, and if it gets really gunky and dirty, it can get jammed open or jammed closed, and that will totally throw off the idle speed, which could be a huge reason that the engine and the car would shake at idle. Now the throttle body's here at the far end of the big intake hose, and we're gonna wanna clean this. So there's a lot of hoses and wires that go in and out of the throttle body, and you just wanna kind of get everything detached from it so that you can pull that throttle body away from the engine. Here's the throttle body itself, and I can see the little butterfly inside that opens and closes inside the throat of this. Okay, I'm just gonna finish unplugging these wires here. And I am actually gonna leave these coolant hoses on here because I don't really wanna get into leaking coolant. All right, I just got these 4 bolts to take off. Come on, loose. 4-inch dive, real line. All right, I kinda wanna be gentle just in case there's a sticky gasket. I don't wanna tear it. I'll make sure it comes out nice and easy. All right, it's not the dirtiest one I've ever seen, but there is a bit of grime and oil on there, as well as some chunks up here by the pivot point, so it'll be good to clean this. Now, when you get into cleaning this thing, you don't want to be pushing on the butterfly to open and close it by hand, so you can kind of mess it up. So you just want to leave it where it is and clean both sides. I'm also going to use my kid's toothbrush to just break up some of that deposit down by the bottom of the butterfly. Just want to get it loosened up. I'm not pushing the butterfly hard or anything. And a little bit more I'm going to get off here. All right, looks nice and clean. Let's put it back on. Okay, other than it started up real quick, if I had to guess, a little quicker than before, but when it's at idle and the air conditioning kicks in, it's just as rough as before at idle. So that did not fix it, folks. So no joy so far. But the next thing I'm gonna do is fairly cheap and easy to do, and that is replace the spark plugs. Now, if you don't know how long it's been since your spark plugs have been changed, it's just a good idea to do it. Because when spark plugs get old, start to wear out, their gaps start getting bigger, they're less efficient, and also they can make the engine run a little bit rougher than normal, but not enough to trigger an engine light. One thing I'm looking for at this point too is if there's a lot of oil on this coil, it means oil is escaping from the engine down into the spark plug hole, and that can be a huge issue, causing rough running, misfires, oil contamination, stuff like that. But where it becomes an issue is when there's like literally oil dripping off the end of this. So you can see there's a little bit on the side, which means that gasket is starting to fail, but it's not yet letting oil down into the cylinder. So for our purposes today, I'm not gonna worry about it. So these spark plugs look decent. They're not super black or super white like they're running rich or lean. Maybe a little worn, but it's kind of hard to tell. But in this case, I've gone to all the work to check these spark plugs. I'm gonna pay the 20 bucks, put new ones in. All right, when you're putting new plugs in, obviously don't drop them in there. You don't wanna bend that electrode. So I'm using a nice high quality plug because it's not that much more to buy the good stuff. Bah. Well, still feels like a massage chair. You can see why I don't take these jobs very often. On to the next thing. So the next thing I'm gonna do is replace the transmission fluid on this car, because a really common reason for rough idle, especially when you're in drive, is dirty transmission fluid. Now, it's not a super hard job, but it does take some time. But if you're interested, we made a great video on how to do your own, which you can check out in the link above. Oh, that is very gross. This stuff is so nasty looking, which actually makes me happy because this might be our issue. Okay, I'm gonna start it up and get that transmission fluid cycling. I'm gonna shift through all the gears. So I'm just gonna let this circulate around for 5-10 minutes, and then I'm gonna do a whole nother round of fluid change. Ooh, still pretty dirty. How do you guys like my funnel? So while I'm waiting for this second round of transmission fluid to circulate, I'm gonna check for vacuum leaks with the carb cleaner. Something I forgot to do earlier. I would have normally done it earlier, but I totally forgot. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spray around the different air hoses, vacuum lines, the intake especially. So the way this works is if you spray near a vacuum leak, it'll actually suck in the carb cleaner into the engine, and you'll hear the idle change in the engine. You definitely want to avoid spraying this on hot exhaust elements like the exhaust manifolds. Just stick to air stuff. I'm doing around the throttle body, CV, hose, valve. I'm gonna do the brake booster line. So I've gone through most of what normally works in the majority of these rough idle cases, and this thing is just kicking my butt. Okay, good news and bad news. Since we last talked, I tried a whole bunch of stuff, and none of it worked. I mean, I tried new coils because I figured if the coils were getting weak, the spark might be weak and it might cause some shaking. I tried a fuel additive, thinking that if the injectors were gummed up, it might be causing the engine to run a little rough. I even tried checking the fuel pressure to confirm that the fuel pump was good. If your fuel pump is getting weak, sometimes it can struggle keeping the engine running smooth. Then I did a throttle relearn procedure, which I shouldn't have to do because I didn't disconnect batteries or anything like that. I did it anyway, and basically it's a series of procedures that you do to teach the engine what the idle speed should be. Somewhere in there, I also took up chain smoking, but none of it worked. Good news is, I did figure it out. I was racking my brain going over all the original steps that I went over with you guys, and I decided to recheck the engine mounts because this one is specifically the one that holds the transmission is a little bit harder to see. And I got a decent look at it from the top, but admittedly I couldn't see the back side of it. So this time I went to the trouble of removing the battery, removing the airbox, some of the other peripherals, so that I could get a really good look at this mount specifically. Sure enough, when I got down in there, there were cracks. It was pretty obvious. Now what I should have done is take a little bit more time at the beginning and really give that mount a good inspection, because this transmission mount on automatic transmission cars is a very common culprit for engine vibrations. So I was actually going to go in and replace it anyway, because they can even be bad even if they don't show signs of cracking. The rubber can be hardened and then they're not really doing their job. And you can buy this transmission mount probably for 50 bucks online. So learn from my mistakes and check those mounts better at the beginning. So after replacing that transmission mount, that nasty vibration is gone. This thing's running smoother than a 20-year Scotch. Speaking of Scotch, check this out. After making this video, don't mind if I do. Hey, if you like this video, you're definitely going to want to check out this one we made on whether you should drive or not when your check engine light comes on.